They say betrayal doesn't come with a bang. It comes dressed in a tailored suit, sipping coffee, pretending to care. It was 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. The department briefing room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and the artificial lemon from wiped-down tables. I sat at the head of the table, the same place I'd occupied every week for the past 11 years. Same polished wood under my fingers, same humming projector overhead, same chipped mug of green tea beside my notes. Only one thing was different. Bryce Langford, the new COO, all manicured smirk and startup lingo. He stood near the whiteboard, adjusting the cuffs on his midnight blue blazer like he was on stage for some TED Talk no one asked for. "We're entering a new phase," he said, voice slick with performance. "And in that phase, some legacy systems and legacy roles no longer align with Apex's future-forward vision." His eyes scanned the room like a drone on idle patrol. I already knew where this was going, but still, when his gaze landed on me, something twisted deep in my gut. "Alina, we appreciate your years of service," he said, his voice dropping into the cadence people use at funerals and corporate terminations. "But it's time to transition." The word hit with the cold clarity of a guillotine. "Today will be your last day. No thank you." No handshake, not even a moment of eye contact. The silence that followed was grotesque. A cough, the nervous shuffle of someone pretending to reread their notes. Even the walls seemed to pull back. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. I closed my notepad, smoothed the hem of my charcoal skirt, stood with every ounce of dignity corporate America had tried to erase from me. My ID badge chirped its final protest against the exit censor. Margaret, the receptionist, gave me a nod. Tight-lipped, brittle, the kind of nod people offer at divorce court or a hospice bed. The air outside stung. Early winter haze hung low over the parking lot, the sun barely managing an apology through the clouds. My coat whipped behind me in the wind as I walked to my car, a navy tote slung over my shoulder. In it, a few desk remnants, my thermos, a well-worn graph pad, and a single item wrapped in an old tea towel. I placed the tote on the passenger seat and sat still for a moment. Then I unfolded the towel. There it was. Helix V 1.1, drawn by hand on sleepless nights, and its edges curled from age and obsession. That blueprint wasn't just paper. It was years of my life. The nervous scrawls in the margins still read like mantras. Recursion is resistance. Precision is protection. They'd renamed it now. Nexar Dynamics. Sleek font, trendy logo, all blue and green branding like that made it new, but the skeleton underneath, the system logic, the core architecture, mine. Every flowchart node, every recursive path, my signature, written not in ink, but in sleepless nights and stubborn afternoons. They didn't fire a relic. They fired the architect. The car engine stayed off as I opened my phone. A live stream thumbnail flickered on screen. Bryce on stage, flanked by neon lights and corporate optimism. "We're entering a new phase," he beamed, "and a proprietary automation platform that revolutionizes manufacturing precision. Nexar Dynamics, built entirely in-house by the brightest minds in automation." Behind him, the slideshow advanced to the system schematic. I almost laughed. There it was. The same logic tree I'd etched into my garage wall during a snowstorm 5 years ago. Identical notepads, same command sequencing, down to the recursive gate protocol I wrote while my cat slept on the server tower. I took a long sip from my thermos. Green tea with lemon.
Bitter. Honest. They thought they'd claimed my creation, that they'd branded brilliance and buried its maker. What they didn't know was that I never truly given it to them. 5 years ago, when the company was still bleeding red ink and rationing paper clips, I offered Helix to Jonah Bauer, the old CEO. He wore steel toe boots and 6 conveyor belts himself when needed. He saw the blueprint and said, "It's genius, Alina, but I've got 3 years till retirement and no energy for revolutions." So I filed the patents myself. Not under my name, of course. Apex liked to claim its people. I needed distance. So I created Morse Integrated Technologies, a shell company in name only. The patents were ironclad, 7 in total, filed, time-stamped, sealed under federal protection. They thought they owned Helix because it lived in their servers, but the DNA, the intellectual marrow, that was mine. And I never gave them the keys. 48 hours after Nexar's launch, I noticed the first hiccup from my remote diagnostic mirror, a little admin tool Apex never revoked access to. It blinked red during my morning tea. Sensor arrays on line 4 started misreading size tolerances, not a glitch, an attempted override. Their engineers tried patching commands mid-process. Helix responded exactly as it was designed to. Shutdown, isolation, defense. When they tried manual restarts, the logic map fragmented, conveyor belts halted, robotic arms jammed mid-cycle. One flung a box of steel brackets into a loading bay wall like it was rejecting the whole idea of incompetence. Damage, $180,000 and counting. Bryce blamed it on patching inconsistencies. I watched in silence. Helix hadn't malfunctioned. It had resisted. I built Helix with one truth in mind. The real threat to automation wasn't mechanical failure. It was human arrogance. So I embedded a digital immune system, an evolving core that didn't just obey, it decided. If someone tampered with it, it adapted, migrated, and cloaked itself. Every intrusion attempt triggered a molecular shift in the logic tree. To them, it looked like bugs. To Helix, it was self-defense. And the beautiful part, they had no idea what they were fighting. They brought in consultants, names from tech hubs who lived on keynote stages and startup podcasts. One leaned back in his $700 ergonomic chair and said, "It's clearly a legacy code issue. Recommend a full system rewrite." Another offered blockchain integration. I nearly choked on my tea. Meanwhile, Helix rewrote its architecture every 6 hours, reshuffled its syntax, changed folder names. Its heartbeat pulsed quietly in the code, like coral shifting with the tide, waiting for the reef walkers to cut themselves. And they did. Over and over. One guy tried a brute force override. Helix looped his script into a dummy function and bounced it back to his terminal, wrapped in a different shell. He spent 2 hours debugging a ghost. Another consultant traced process calls, but Helix had moved again. They were in a maze with invisible walls. One engineer, pale-faced and whispering, said, "It's like it knows we don't belong." He was right. They didn't.
You could almost feel it, the paranoia, the weight of invisible eyes in the air. The engineers at Apex started whispering. Not loud, not openly, but you could hear it if you leaned in. Things didn't break like this when Alina was around. That whisper, soft as breath, was the first real crack in Bryce Langford's carefully polished empire. It spread. Quietly, through emails that vanished after reading, over cold coffee and long glances at terminals that no longer obeyed. And then,
came the message. Just before noon, a ping lit up my private inbox. No greeting, no fluff, just one line. You were Helix, weren't you? It was from Rowan, one of the junior systems engineers who used to hover nervously at my whiteboard, watching me debug live code like it was sorcery. I didn't reply with words. I sent a screenshot. U.S. patent number 10.812444, B2. Filed under Morse Integrated Technologies. 7 pages. Every subroutine, every adaptive logic path. My name, Alina Morse, etched into every claim. He didn't respond, but the message turned red. And I knew he was staring at it, blinking, slowly realizing how deep the roots ran. All those nights watching me sketch logic trees on whiteboards, every diagram he'd filed away as too advanced for now. Now, they needed it. Desperately. Back inside Apex, Bryce was unraveling. He'd screamed at the whiteboard during a systems meeting. Someone told me he flung a dry erase marker across the room when no one could offer a solution. The IT department had gone into full meltdown. Double shifts, all hands. Every override attempt responded with recursive loops, error logs that regenerated when deleted, and processes that no longer existed where they were supposed to. They started calling Helix the virus. At first as a joke, then not so much. Someone claimed the dashboard icons changed when no one touched them. Another swore they heard a system alert whisper in someone's voice. My voice. They were wrong. Of course, I hadn't embedded any ghosts. But Helix was smart. Helix was watching. I logged out of my admin mirror and turned to the folder on my desk, labeled Licensing and Enforcement. It was time. Not for revenge, for clarity. I didn't draft an email that would have been too polite, too deniable. I made a call to Rosenbell and Knox, the kind of law firm that didn't advertise on billboards, specialists in intellectual property law, and, more importantly, humiliation by precision. I handed over everything. Patent logs, architecture schematics, time-stamped system blueprints, diagnostic trails, server interactions, administrative mirrors. They didn't ask why. Only one question. Do you want to go nuclear? I said, no. I want to go quietly nuclear. The kind that ends careers, not lives. 2 days later, a courier arrived at Apex headquarters. Tailored gray suit, no briefcase, just one envelope. Heavy cream cardstock, sealed with red wax, embossed with the Rosenbell insignia. He didn't sit, didn't accept water, just signed the delivery log and said 5 words. Please confirm delivery. Thank you. Inside was an 8-page cease and desist. Letterhead so crisp it practically hummed. 7 counts of patent infringement, every one backed by ironclad registration and cross-reference design. Page 6 outlined the demands. Immediate suspension of all Helix, now known as Nexer, operations. Removal of every dependent module. Public apology to the rightful architect, Alina Morse. Publication of said apology in Manufacturing Today, Tech Ops Weekly, and Apex's quarterly investor brief. And the cost to retain Helix? $31.5 million. 10 times what Bryce had claimed their brightest minds spent building it. I imagine the boardroom that morning. Bryce unfolding that letter with a smirk still barely clinging to his lips. Each paragraph stripping it away, line by line. He thought he was building the future. What he didn't realize was that he had built it on someone else's blueprint. And now He was locked out. But he did what fragile men always do when cornered. He refused. Maybe he thought he could stall it. Maybe he believed lawyers with expensive haircuts could bulldoze past federal patents. Or maybe he just couldn't bear to admit that the system he launched with so much fanfare never really belonged to him. The next morning, he walked into the server room himself, ties undone, sleeves rolled up, sweat breaking through, and initiated a manual reboot. Helix didn't blink. It shut down. Deliberately. Production dashboards across the network went dark. For exactly 3 seconds. Then came the message. Every terminal, every monitor, every screen. System license invalid, authority null. At first, Bryce called it a minor systems hiccup. Until robotic arms frozen mid-cycle, until conveyors stopped cold, until order queues began erasing themselves. By noon, they'd missed a $600K shipment. By midnight, 2 more major contracts had collapsed. Vendors stopped returning calls. Clients began whispering words no tech exec wants to hear. Unstable. Unsafe. Untrustworthy. Bryce screamed at the engineering team, threatening firings, demanding fixes, but nothing made sense anymore. The logs erased themselves upon access. Databases folded in recursive loops, backup files labeled themselves Ghost Drive 0, and then vanished. One technician tried to restore an archived workflow. The screen went blue, then black, then flickered this phrase. We warned you. Back in my garage, my lab, my sanctuary, I watched the whole thing unfold. Sipping tea, monitoring diagnostics. Every cascade error, every bypass failure, every desperate attempt to regain control. Helix wasn't crashing. It was deciding. And without a license, it had no reason to respond. The landline rang at 4:12 p.m. Not my cell, not a Slack ping. The landline. The one that only 3 people in the world ever used anymore. I let it ring twice before I answered. Miss Morse, came the voice. Tired, sincere. Martin Kai, from Apex. I waited. I know this isn't ideal, but we need your help, he said, voice low. I stirred my tea, slowly. A bird outside struggled to perch on the lavender bush, wings twitching against the wind. Does Bryce know you're calling? I asked. No, and he wouldn't approve. Silence. Then, but this isn't about his approval anymore. Martin had been there during the early years, before Apex had logos on coffee mugs, before Bryce's TED Talk budget. He knew the truth. You built Helix. You're the only one who can help us recover. The board is panicking. The production floor is dead. I let the quiet settle, then reached for the envelope on my desk, labeled Emergency Tier Licensing. My consulting rate starts at 7 figures. He didn't argue. Understood, he said softly, and hung up.
By the end of the week, the Apex boardroom looked like a funeral in slow motion. Chairs half-turned, blinds drawn, 2 execs on her second ulcer of the month. And in the center, Bryce Langford, jaw tight, hair thinner than last quarter, face pale like he'd seen a ghost. Which, in a way, he had. Because I walked in. Not in heels, not in a pencil skirt, not the executive material he used to mock behind closed doors. No. I wore combat boots. A slate gray hoodie, my hair pulled back in a braid like the old days, before titles, before betrayals. I didn't come to impress.
I came to reclaim. Martin rose first. Alina? I held up a hand. Let's skip the pleasantries. I set down a sleek black flash drive. Minimal, clean, labeled simply Helix, master key. Bryce's eyes latched onto it like it was water in a desert. Is that? Yes, I said. And no, you can't just plug it in. He opened his mouth, ready to spit something venomous. I turned to the board instead. I'm not here to negotiate with a thief, I said. I'm here because Martin convinced me Apex might still be salvageable. But not under him. I pointed directly at Bryce. A murmur rippled across the board. You're holding this company hostage. You're extorting us. No, I cut in, voice cool as winter. You stole from me. You humiliated me. You tried to rewrite history and failed. All I'm doing is restoring it. I slid a thin folder toward the center of the table. Inside were 2 documents. A full enterprise license agreement for Helix, with a premium annual fee and mandatory technical oversight by me and my team. A resignation letter, written by an AI based on Bryce's speech patterns, auto-formatted to corporate HR standards. The board stared, then looked at each other. Bryce's voice cracked. You can't. We already voted, said one of the women near the end of the table. Her voice was calm, measured, lethal. Bryce froze. You're out, another board member confirmed. Effective immediately. Silence. A silence so sharp it could draw blood. He turned to me, not angry now, just hollow. You won, he whispered. I tilted my head. No, Helix won. The next morning, I walked through the Apex facility, not as a visitor, not as a ghost of the past, but as its new CTO. Technicians stood straighter when I passed. Engineers nodded with eyes wide with the kind of respect that's only earned after being erased and coming back stronger. Helix had already started recalibrating. Lines began moving again, arms realigned, conveyor belts buzzed with a smooth hum that made the floor vibrate slightly under your feet. And the dashboard? It now pulsed with a new symbol in the corner. A coiled shape, subtle but unmistakable. The Helix. My signature. That night, I stood on the rooftop overlooking the city, breathing in the cool evening air. Martin joined me, 2 mugs of black tea in hand. You know, he said, the staff is already saying the system feels different, like it knows what we need before we do. It always did, but now it's finally listening to the right voice. He smiled, quiet. What's next? I looked out at the skyline, the buildings flickering with life. Far below, trucks rolled out of Apex's bay doors, filled with precision parts programmed by code I had poured my soul into. I build, I said. It's what I've always done. He raised his mug. To building. I tapped his cup with mine. To rebuilding. Stronger? Smarter? Mine.